Well, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a good lunch. So today, what I want to talk to you about is the progression of Vuetify through our version 2, our upgrade to Material Design 2, the progress that we've made over the year iterating on that, and a surprise at the end showing some of our composition API for Vue 3 and a demo. So let's hope that it goes good. So if you don't know who I am, my name is John Leider. I'm the author of Beautify, and I've been working on it since June of 2016. I've been full-time since October 2017, and right now, Beautify is my full-time job. And so what is Beautify? Often when I describe it, yes, it's a UI library built on Vue for material design, but I often describe Vue as kind of like the blueprint, like you're building a house, it's the walls, and Beautify is kind of the decor, it's the art on the wall, the paint on the walls, and it's just to help make your application look good without having to be a designer. And so when version 2 came out, it released in July, it was a big step for the team. Version 1.5, if you've used it, you know, it was sufficient, but not a high quality product. It had lots of room for improvement. And the unfortunate thing was when we released version 1.0, Google released Material Design 2, and we were just not ready to upgrade. So we had a long time to get back to that point, which we did this year. I'm very happy about, and got some really cool things. If you haven't been up or working with Beautify, we have some really cool new features that have come in lately that I think is going to, hopefully, for some of the people that had maybe concerns like with styling or configuration, hopefully we can squash that and we can maybe get you back into the framework. So the good parts of what we did for 2.0, 1.5 was terrible for accessibility. It had decent RTL support, but other than that, from a polished perspective for a large enterprise business, there was not a lot of features that they could say, I can't use that. So it was a big focus for us to make sure that we were accommodating for accessibility. Section 508, which is, I'm pretty sure it's just pertaining to the United States for military. But we also now have full RTL support with over 32 languages, so that includes right-to-left languages, Arabic. And we also have some very massive performance increasements. If you've ever used any of our inputs in 1.5, if you started to have many on the page, you might notice a slowdown. And luckily, some of our smart team members were able to figure out a way to stop components re-rendering. And as of 2.1, we have massive performance improvements when you're using with inputs. We've completely revamped the process for styling an application. All the tools already existed, but we didn't do a really good job of creating a cohesive process for developers to use. So it required a little bit more from the developer to achieve what they wanted. So that was something that I set out for with version 2.2 that released in December. And I'm going to go over a couple of the things that we did with that later on. We also introduced a bunch of new components, which is kind of tricky, right? As a UI framework, no matter what, you're always going to grow horizontally. So it doesn't matter how good you are or how efficient you are. So when we put new components in, we try to make sure that they target a particular part of an application that is lacking, maybe something that users are missing. That I often ask people, when you work with Beautify, what do you grab for that's not there? And these are the kind of things that we try to mold into our future implementations for components. And also with version 2.2, we introduced new directives that integrate with the JavaScript observer APIs, and I'll go over that in just a minute. So with accessibility, it's kind of a tricky problem. With Beautify, we try to give you a good baseline. And with that baseline, we also want you to be able to customize. So we say, hey, here's our component. If you don't like it, here are the tools that we use to build it, and you can build your own. But one of the challenges with accessibility is getting that information down to the component. We don't know if the user is going to use a button, or they're going to use an icon, or whatever they're going to use to, for example, in this instance, trigger the menu. And we had to be able to pass that information down, in a lot of cases, automatically generate it for the user. If you've ever worked with a select, for example, a custom one, you might know how difficult it is to create correlation between the information that exists in the input and the menu that shows for the user, which is a very large complication for accessibility for NVDA and other situations. So what we did is we passed the information down to the user, and you just bind it, just like you would with anything else. It's something that's very familiar that you would use with Vue anyways, and what that allows us to do is, because of the reactivity of the scope slots, we're able to dynamically change. For example, when the menu's open, then the button will update, its area expanded, has pop-up, etc. And as with anything in development, it's an ongoing process, but the really cool thing was this year we were able to meet up with a developer, and I may pronounce his name incorrectly, but Fighter, and he works at a company that accessibility is very, very huge, and I teamed up with him, we got him the contributors, and he's a dedicated accessibility guy. So we're always constantly making improvements, and with the framework, one of the big things that we saw is, outside of Bootstrap or frameworks that just use the baseline HTML, because you're going to have guaranteed accessibility that way regardless, not a lot of people fully encompass all the aspects of accessibility, so that's something that we're definitely continually improving. And then we've also started providing more information on specific components. So for example, if you have a banner, which is a new component, Material Design 2, and you want to get some information about how its accessibility is actually configured, well, now we have that in the documentation, and we explain, this is what we use, this is why we use it, and here's the information regarding it. So hopefully to empower developers to not only use these important features, but also understand why they're there and the purpose. So internationalization, now we've always kind of had this, but we've continued to expand. I believe we're over 30 languages right now, and this is for the default components within Beautify. And with version 2, we made it really easy to be able to do things like dynamically change your language on the fly, and be able to have all of your components and all of your stuff just automatically update. Also integrating with like Vue I18N, which hopefully, if you're working with internationalization, you use. It's a great piece of software. But we integrate with that, and also if there was ever any other type of plugin like that, we integrate with that, because we open up our API so that you can pretty much use whatever you want, or you can just use what we provide. Another thing, and this kind of goes into RTL, is the bi-directionality. So in Beautify, you can actually configure it at a global level on the fly, but you can also configure it at a component level. Interesting thing is, I spoke with someone yesterday who actually needed to use that particular feature because they had built an application for the Quran. And I was very excited to see how that actually worked out. And again, so you can actually configure down to a base level, giving you a little bit more control, because not everyone's application is the same, and maybe you want to display something particular for that process, and now you have the ability to. Keep in mind, this is pertaining to version 2. It's different, and I'll show you in version 3 in a little bit. But one of the big things that we really wanted to do with version 2 was get full TypeScript support. And thanks to Kale and Yasik and Albert, and working with the Vue team, we were able to come up with a way to provide the best possible typing that we could with the way that Vue is now. And what this allowed us to do is, because even though we utilized an extend model, everything was always built compositionally. Everything's stacked, text field, select, autocomplete. So the process existed as far as implementation was just different in version 2. But we were able to get the entire framework updated to TypeScript. We added new features and functionality as far as integrations in Vetter, integrations in PHP, the JetBrains products for their browsers and IDEs, and we're continually working to improve the developer experience. We had, if anyone remembers our VS Code plugin that we used to have, we're actually bringing that back. We have a new champion for it. So again, always trying to work on some new tools to provide developers more information so that they can develop more efficiently. So one of the biggest problems that I hear from everyone is, it's great, material design, but what can we do to style it? So, like I said before, we kind of already had these processes in place, but they weren't super refined, and because they weren't super refined, they weren't very well documented, because we weren't really comfortable where they're at. We knew we needed the functionality, but we were still kind of iterating on it. So in comes Vue CLI 3, which is amazing, which is the big differentiator in Vue to me. And we were able to create a plugin that can hook in and do some really awesome dynamic things. For example, when you use the Beautify CLI plugin, it will allow you to easily and dynamically create variable files, modify our underlying styling, and it will automatically persist in your application. You don't have to do anything. You just create a file and it works. So it's really easy to opt in at any point in time. We added thousands of Sass variables in our last version, probably, maybe more. And the only downside, though, is the initial compilation time. Because Beautify transpiles the dependencies and node modules, this allows us to, one, have better tree shaking for our styles, but it does come at the cost of a little bit of initial compilation time, which we are working on right now, and we have a couple ways to get around it, but we're going to have a more solid solution in version 3. And again, all right, that's really cool, John, but my designer still hates material design. Okay. Well, Google heard this too, and they said, okay, so what can we do? We have these really good design principles. What can we do to apply them in different scenarios? So enter material studies. And what material studies was for Google is say, okay, we have this baseline. What can we change to maintain the principles that we spent all this money to develop, but also give people the identity of, hey, this does not look like a material application at all. And with the power of Vue CLI and a little bit of Vuetify magic, basically we utilize the Sass variables that we provide. We utilize the configuration of Vuetify when you instantiate a new instance to start your application. And we create this process that allows you to essentially, if you're a user developing, it's very simple. You work with 2 files and we have a process, but you can also share them. You can create anything that you want. An example right here, this is one of the material studies, Basil, and there's 7 in total. And essentially what they do is, okay, maybe everything's a tile, or they use a different font. Sometimes they have maybe a particular component looks a little different. But it is an interesting way to introduce people into, hey, this is material design, but it doesn't have to be as such. And it also kind of sets a foundation for future features because we're eventually going to allow people to configure pretty much everything in the framework before, as far as like components, props, and stuff like that. We're working on ways on the actual process, but again, continually expanding on the customization that's available in Vuetify. Some other quality of life changes that we made. So if anyone, has anyone worked with the Intersection Observer API? Extremely powerful. And it's also, you could polyfill it. And what this allows us to do is, with such an extreme focus on performance and SEO optimization, lighthouse scores, you hear that all the time, we need to come up with new ways to be able to lazily load content and not render things above the fold or below the fold that are not required. Now, if anyone's following, you know that image just got an update. It's coming soon where it's like built-in lazy loading. But what we're able to do a little bit differently is with the intersect, we can apply this to multiple things. We give you an interface of a directive. You can bind it to any element. And if you don't know what Intersection Observer does, it allows you to know when an element is visible on the screen, which is very important for things like lazy loading images or lazy loading content. So when we created this, it allowed us to do things like deferred loading for image automatically. It just works out of the box. You don't have to do anything. It allows us to think about new ways that we can design components. For example, if you've ever worked with maybe a table of contents and you scroll down and the highlighted item changes, this directive kind of enables functionality like that. And then it also, one of the things that we did, if you worked in 1.5 and you used what we call detachables, this dialog menu tooltip, these are components where their content, whenever it's rendered, will detach to the root of your application and then display. But what we did is in version 2, we realized most people don't need them right away, so we made everything lazy by default. And this drastically decreased the start time of people's applications because it wasn't have to render all this content. And you can still make it eager, for example, if you have a particular implementation where you want something to show for SEO. You can make it eager, but default out of the box, we're trying to give users the best performance possible for their application. And again, better SEO, we've got smaller bundles and improved performance with the latest version. One of the things that we introduced with 1.5, and I'm actually very proud of because I don't think very many open source projects are able to do this, but we offer long-term support. And what that means is for it, starting, well, it's in version 1.5 until July. But once we release version 3, we'll probably iterate one more minor on the 2.0 branch, and then that will be long-term support for 18 months. So security, vulnerabilities, critical bugs, there will be security reports, information out regarding, hey, this is what happened, and it gets fixed immediately, period. And we also work very extensively with trying to backport fixes. So a lot of times the code base changes in the newer version, and it's really hard to do that. So we often work with community members that are still using those versions to try to backport them and get them in pull requests. And then we take this all together and we say, okay, hey, how can we get people to easily upgrade so that we can get them to the latest version so that we can make sure we have good support? And we've been working on improving those guides. And then, again, we also have lots of help channels. If you've ever been in our Discord server, which is community.beautify.js.com, I implore you to come join. We have an extremely active community with a lot of very passionate developers that are very eager to help people work through Vuetify, become better developers, solve problems, share the awesome things that we make, and it's just a really great experience, and I definitely would like everyone to please join and check it out. But overall, the point of long-term support is to get peace of mind. You have to go to your leadership and you have to say, hey, we want to use this software, and he says, well, is it guaranteed? And this kind of gives developers and business say, okay, hey, I know this is going to be covered, so I feel confident in being able to start a project in it. Now, one of the things, and I'm trying to hurry up here, one of the things that I've focused on very extensively this year, if anyone remembered Vue's transition to version 2, the team kind of focused on tooling. They had a very good baseline, and they said, okay, we can move on and start creating tooling to help increase our ecosystem. And that's kind of where we are right now. And the idea is we want to create this collaborative ecosystem of plugins that enables developers to not only be more efficient and develop better, but to implement good practices and procedures. Who writes unit tests, or who wants to write unit tests, right? It's very difficult. So trying to come up with a way to integrate that into the development process without increasing time has been my big focus for this year. Another thing that's really interesting, so progressive images whenever you compile your application with Beautify, you can enable automatic progressive images. If you've ever been to like Medium, you open the page and it's blurry and it fades in. Really helps with performance, and this just works. You don't have to do anything. And we also have one of the greatest features, I believe, is, as I explained earlier, we'll always grow horizontally. There's nothing we can do. So we have to be able to get rid of what you don't use. This example right here is, I think I'm using like 6 or 7 components. But the biggest thing I want to emphasize on is when we worked with developers, and we work with a lot of companies to make sure that we're meeting those needs, most people didn't even use 50% of the framework. So they saw these really massive bundle size decreases, and it just works. You don't have to do anything. You install Beautify, you compile, and it's done. Also, CLI presets. Has anyone ever heard of those? You might have saw it at the end of your creation of a new Vue application where it asks you, would you like to save this for the future? But there's also a variant of online where you can have an online preset that can designate the same concepts, but you can add additional things like prompts and generators. And what I've broken everything up into is whenever I talk with the developers, I always say, I don't know how to structure things. I don't know what it's supposed to look like, and I spend more time doing that. And I see so many people make very small mistakes in regards to not using things like ESLint, or they don't know how to install it, and it just really decreases how efficient you are in your development. So we have 3 presets that are coming out. The one is out right now, and you'll be able to install it here in just a minute. But the idea is get the user started. Did anyone ever use Vue CLI 2? The monolithic GitHub repository that was impossible to maintain? The one aspect that I enjoyed about that was I kind of felt like I had an application already there. Even though creating a new Vue CLI application is still very complete, there are still a lot of things that are left up to user land to configure. So just like we trust the Vue team to create the most efficient process when we create Vue CLI applications, it's our duty to do the same. And what we do here is, so we start out with a base preset that creates your basic app, installs things like our ESLint config and plugin, and also the Beautify plugin. And this is just a basic app to get you going. Then you move to the next step. Okay, well, maybe you want to do a bigger application. Well, we have Beautify CLI, which is going to be a scaffolding CLI that integrates with Vue CLI to where you can create components, views, you can designate the way things look. And instead of spending time, okay, well, how is this structured? What does this look like? You just create it and it works. And the great thing is, because Vue CLI, you can actually check and see if other plugins exist. We can hook in and do some really interesting things. For example, with the CLI, we can detect if you have unit tests. And if you have unit tests, when you create a new component, we just generate a unit test for you. Same thing with Storybook. We detect that you're using the Storybook plugin, the Beautify Storybook plugin. With Beautify CLI, we just generate a Storybook entry for you. They're very basic, but it gets your foot in the door to be able to actually have something in place. So maybe you can't do a unit test now or the Storybook now, but it's there. And when you're able to get to it, you don't have to think about it. And it shouldn't increase your time, and that's what we're kind of going for. A Vue CLI 2 on steroids is kind of what I say. We want to improve productivity, reduce cognitive load, and really just help developers become better and be able to create some amazing applications. So I know I'm running out of time, but I said yesterday we're going to talk a little bit about 3.0. The team was able to get together over the course of January after the alpha was released for Vue 3 and just start iterating. And we finally have a good, cohesive path forward to be able to determine what that's going to look like. Now, we had some goals. First of all, we have to rebuild in the composition API. Well, we're already using render functions, so that's pretty easy. We want to replace mix-ins with effects. And if you've ever, again, used Vuetify in detail, you know how much I love mix-ins. I'm probably the reason why Evan's getting rid of them. I'm serious. We wanted to improve the component structure. I like things to be linear. I like to understand what something needs to do and what it looks like, put it on paper, and never think about it again. So, and this is also a process that helps with contributing. And then we also, again, wanted to improve the development process, not only for us, but with as expansive as Vuetify has become, it is absolutely impossible to maintain anything by myself. So having a defined process allows us to bring in more users to help contribute because we don't have to answer so many questions. It's already taken care of. One of the things that we've done is we've reduced the complexity. So if you've poked around with the Vue 3 composition API, this is probably not too new to you. But again, we wanted to establish a solid coding guideline for what this looked like. We wanted to identify the primary roles of features. We want to have the functionality scoped very tightly and not make something very so verbose. vSelect is a great example. It's a trap component. There's tons of features you can add that makes it extremely good, but it doesn't fit for everyone. So we want to make sure that we have a really defined purpose for a component. And if any features or functionalities that are not useful there or duplicated, we pull them out. And again, we just want to improve the contributor experience, make it easier for us to maintain, and give more opportunities for Vuetify to grow. Mix-in madness, again, so for us, it reduced the duplicated code, it made testing easier, and it really fit our extension model. But again, the problem was it obfuscates where the functionality came from. You had a high impact or a high chance for name collisions, and then again, it's very confusing for contributors. You don't know where information's coming from. Again, it makes the code hard to reason about. So introducing effects, which the name may change. I think the core team, Vue core team didn't like the name, so we'll see. But it uses the Vue 3 composition API. And what we've done is it's essentially just moving over the code. In a lot of cases, everything just transfers over, especially since we use render functions. But what this allows us to do now is not only improve our TypeScript, which is one of the big benefits of Vue 3, but it also allows us to get rid of all the obfuscation. And it allows us to be able to have users understand where information is coming from and be more efficient whenever they're contributing. So yes, release. Well, that wasn't supposed to come right away. So this is heavily dependent on when Vue releases. We are working directly in tandem, and the goal is day one to release with Vue 3. And again, that's going to depend upon their release cycle and what's going on. But the great thing about this is if you've ever heard of Notion, it's an amazing application. You can go right now to notion.beautify.js.com, and you can see the entire version 3 plan, down to the component, coding guidelines, everything. And we're trying to get as many people on there to help us create this designated path for how things get developed so that there's a cohesive path forward for getting more help for development. And then we'll do a really quick live demo if you'd like to follow along. This is the preset that I was talking about. I was poking Akram earlier or yesterday about can we get something similar as Vue add, but for presets so we can reduce the amount of text that we have to write. But if you have your computer right now, you can go ahead and install this. Because it does create a completely fully scaffolded application, it will take a little bit. So because of that, I already have it installed on my computer so I can kind of quickly go through some of the benefits of it. Again, very basic Vue layout, same thing that you're normally accustomed to with just a couple small tweaks. If you've used Nuxt, they've got layouts. I love them. But how do you bring that to an SPA? So created a process for making it so that you can have layouts. Out of the box, this is going to be, and it's probably not there just yet, but it's going to be 100, 100 light score. So when you're starting with it, you know that if it goes below that, it might be just your fault. But the idea is, again, provide users with a structure that helps them be able to move forward and actually develop. Most of our developers, well, most, but a lot of our developers are back-end, and they don't know anything about design, but they love that they can just put things in there and it works. So giving them more tools to succeed helps increase the ecosystem, makes everything better, and it just gives a much better user experience. And just real quick, I'll kind of show you what that looks like. Again, very basic. This is the base one, and again, there will be essential and recommended coming out soon. But it just gets you in the door. You can start working on an application. It's already set up with everything that, again, we on the team recommend. You can still change it. It still implements the modularity of Vue CLI, so you can add and remove packages all you want, but you have a solid starting base. And, oops. Finishing up, so if anyone's talked with me, you know how passionate I am about what I believe in open source authors' commitment to a community is. I absolutely love giving back, and I really think it's important to acknowledge the shoulders of the people that we stand on that allow us to be in this position to help. And this is not an extensive list of everyone that's contributed, but these are definitely some very big people that have made this project as successful as it is. My philosophy is surround yourself with smart people and listen to them. And personally, to me, they're the real heroes, so I want to say, a big thank you. And if you guys wouldn't mind giving a round of applause for all the help the contributors do. And just like with any open source project, we have sponsors so that we can continue to have the funds that we need in order to progress the framework further. And a big thanks to them for being solid and making sure that we had the financial means to be able to continue forward with the development without compromising anything in between. And if you're interested, we do have information for how you can sponsor us through GitHub Sponsors and Open Collective, and you actually get quite a few benefits, including even being able to talk with the dev team to get help, which is really awesome. And that's pretty much it. Thank you. I really appreciate being invited here to talk. It's been an amazing experience. I've got to talk with a lot of people, and it's been so much fun. Again, please join us in our community. It is an awesome place to get help and advice. You can send me questions, ask me things. I'm always in there talking, and social media is there as well. And yeah, that's my talk. I'm John Leider, and this has been Beautify.
Thank you, John, and for all the work that you do on Beautify. This is absolutely fantastic.
Thank you very much.